Right now, the Kremlin is in shock. The truth has come out: Russia is preparing to go to war with China and recognizes the PRC as an enemy. And Musk is already in Moscow. An incredible strike by Ukraine, they destroyed an entire trainload of equipment, tanks and key factories in Russia's rear. Bombers torn to shreds. An elite Russian brigade wiped off the face of the earth, thousands killed. Shocking footage, a rebellion in the USA. These shots will truly surprise you. The end of the war is near. Zelenskyy knows how to finish off the Kremlin. All this and more in our program Hotspot. Urgent, China the Kremlin's secret enemy. Sensational FSB documents have fallen into the hands of Western media. And this is a shock. Inside the secret circulars of the Russian special services, Beijing is directly called an enemy of Russia. What has Putin been hiding all this time? How will Xi Jinping react when he finds out that the brotherly friendship is just a facade? And why does the Kremlin fear China more than NATO? All the shocking details are coming up next.
In public, they shake hands and pretend to be best friends. But behind each other's backs, they hate and even fear one another. And now, what everyone suspected has been confirmed. Let's be honest, when Putin stands across from Xi, Xi looks at him like a victim sour cream and just wants to crush this blot. Journalists from the New York Times obtained a classified report from an FSB think tank in which China is openly called Russia's strategic enemy. Russians are alarmed and say that China is a strategic enemy and that China has not forgiven them. You know, it's just keep. China still remembers the Opium War, which side Russia was on, and how it later stole their territory as 1 million square kilometers. 1 million square kilometers of territory. And how China was weak during Mao's time after the war. How Russia once again seized their territories, how the Russian army stood at their borders and threatened to attack. China has not forgotten any of this. At the same time, in the document that experts have already called the original, it is stated that the main threat from China comes from the activities of its intelligence services. Russian officers say that Beijing is increasingly trying to recruit Russian spies and get its hands on military technologies, sometimes luring dissatisfied Russian scientists.
Chinese universities and companies regularly offer generous grants and research projects to Western scientists and specialists. For example, the MSS actively works with researchers in the fields of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and military technologies. They invite them to conferences, offer funding, but in exchange, they demand access to valuable research.
The Russian FSB also believes that China is spying on Russian military operations in Ukraine to learn about Western weapons and methods of warfare. Intelligence officers are also concerned that Beijing is laying the groundwork to make territorial claims against Russia.
Russia is afraid of China and knows that China may soon start seizing their territories. The Russians have swept their special services from the northern border to the border with Ukraine. We've pulled this bear onto ourselves, and China is taking full advantage of this backyard as it pleases, essentially sending its own agents in there, sending in active agents.
In addition, the report by Russian intelligence officers states that Chinese spies are also conducting espionage in the Arctic, using mining companies and university research centers as cover.
The MSS is at once an intelligence agency, a counterintelligence service, a secret police, and a cyber unit. It monitors Chinese citizens abroad, recruits foreign agents, attacks the servers of Western corporations, and interferes in the politics of other countries.
It is known that the threats the FSB currently sees from China barely fit into the 8 pages of the internal document obtained by journalists. In particular, it sets out the priorities and methods for countering Chinese espionage. The document is undated, which is why analysts believe it is a draft. However, from the context it follows that it was written at the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024, that is, already during the covert military cooperation with China. Nevertheless, geostrategic calculations show that it is always advantageous for Beijing to conduct intelligence operations against Moscow.
If the US goes to war with China, ultimately the US will win. If China needs a war, someone to defeat it will be Russia. China wins. China needs to reclaim its territories again. Again, Russia. Russia will play on China's side. China will resolve its issues. Russia loses. Still Russia. There's simply no point in attacking Cambodia, Myanmar, or Malaysia.
That just wouldn't result in any territorial gains. But the fact that Moscow has gathered so much land under its control that it can no longer manage it is now obvious to everyone. So the major redistribution that Putin has set in motion will very likely affect him as well.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. The end of the war is near. Zelenskyy has announced a sensational plan that could force the Kremlin to retreat. Meanwhile, in the US, there is total chaos. A rebellion in California, Los Angeles is on fire, Russian strategic bombers have been destroyed, and Putin has been silent for more than a week. This is a blow the Kremlin cannot stomach. Meanwhile, Musk's father is in Russia and has made an ambiguous statement. What is happening and what does the war have to do with it? All the most shocking details you may have missed are coming up next.
We are close to forcing Russia to end the war. This was stated in an interview by the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
We have come very close to the moment when we can force Russia to end the war, or at least to stop it. We are very close to this. We can feel it.
He also stated that Putin will not stop at achieving his goal of restoring the Soviet Union and will not leave Ukraine alone.
The United States needs unity with Europe and must continue to put pressure on Putin. He does not want to end the war, but he can be made to end it through pressure from partners. In my opinion, this gives us a chance.
Meanwhile, from the US side, we can once again observe support, but unfortunately it is only verbal. Marco Rubio stated the importance of continuing peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia.
We need to continue what we have been doing before. We need to unite, we need to consolidate around Ukraine. It's important to understand that Ukraine is buying time not only for Europe, but also for many other countries where the influence of the Russian Federation extends. And indeed, Ukraine is the country that will not accept the capitulation terms of the Russian Federation, which it outlined in that last memorandum at the second Istanbul meeting, and is even prepared, let's say, to carry out painful special operations on the territory of the Russian Federation itself.
So what about the results of the successful Ukrainian Operation Web, where at least 10 Russian aircraft were destroyed? Well, this is exactly where Putin fell silent and has not commented on the situation even once. And it's not just Putin. All the Kremlin propagandists have kept their mouths shut.
And what can the Russian Federation, what can Putin even say about this? That the security services have completely failed? That their counterintelligence has completely failed? That, in fact, they don't control not only the territory of the Russian Federation, but they don't even control their own key nuclear triad assets, and strategic bombers are part of Russia's nuclear triad. They don't control those either.
Nevertheless, during Putin's conversation with Trump, he stated that there would be some kind of retaliation for Operation Web. But Zelenskyy pointed out that the Russian dictator's statements about an alleged response to the special operation are false, and that Russia is deliberately preparing for the shelling.
What Putin said is not true. Because if you look at our operation, exactly one day before it, there was the largest strike on Ukraine. A day before the operation, there were 480 or 483 drones, not including missiles. Just drones alone, you see, almost 5,000. So he wanted to find an excuse for his next strikes.
Well, now Trump isn't laughing anymore. While he was laughing at Biden, who stumbled while boarding the plane, the very same fate befell the US president himself. Well, all right. Actually, that's not all. Protests broke out in Los Angeles due to mass raids by immigration authorities and Trump's tough policy toward illegal immigrants. To be continued. And all this is happening even though the National Guard deployed by the Trump administration is already in action. Nevertheless, Trump stated that such lawless riots only strengthen his resolve. He instructed his ministers to take all necessary measures to free Los Angeles from the migrant invasion and to put an end to the unrest.
Even sociologists in the United States are saying different agencies, different organizations, that Trump's approval rating is falling. But of course, it is still quite high. We shouldn't have any illusions here, because some people are already talking about impeachment, about how realistic it is. Now, all of that is still under the control of Congress. As for the Senate, it's too early to talk about that.
Meanwhile, Elon Musk's father, Errol Musk, has arrived in Moscow on an important mission. He will take part in the Forum of the Future 2050, where one of the likely most important topics will be ensuring population growth.
In fact, let's be honest, this visit might not mean anything and might not lead to anything. But the fact that the Russian Federation, through its manipulative IPSO, yes, and propaganda will, let's say, promote an entirely pro-Russian version of events, there is absolutely no doubt about that.
Previously, Elon Musk was an engineer and managed several enterprises in the Republic of South Africa. Nevertheless, his relationship with his son Elon Musk is strained and far from close.
They launched an assault. The Kremlin has thrown all its forces into a new summer offensive, a strike in 3 directions at once. Meanwhile, the battle for oil. Russia is clinging to the Baltic with all its might. Sea routes bring in billions. Without them, there's no money for missiles, Shahids, or the army. But it's not that simple. The Russians have entered Dnipropetrovsk region. Ukraine has made an urgent statement. We will show the truth about what is happening at the front. Details, figures, and footage right now.
A new Russian drone with artificial intelligence. Ukrainian intelligence has revealed the specifications of the V2U strike drone. Namely, the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine has identified the features of the new strike drone, which is being actively used in the Sumy direction. Its main feature is the autonomous selection of targets using artificial intelligence. As intelligence has determined, the drone is capable of matching images from its camera with preloaded photos of the terrain. This allows it to operate without GPS, which is being jammed by Ukrainian electronic warfare systems. Navigation is carried out using so-called computer vision. Calculations are performed by a powerful system based on the Chinese mini-PC laptop A203 with an American NVIDIA Jetson Orin processor. This allows the drone to operate independently without constant communication with the operator. Despite the Russian labeling, most of the components are of Chinese origin. The drone uses a motor, GPS module, servos, SSD drive, rangefinder, batteries and speed controllers from China, a photosensitive sensor from Sony in Japan, a relay from the Irish company Tecon Activity, and an artificial intelligence module from the USA Jetson Orin. And that's all. Communication is carried out in FPV format via LTE. A microdrive tandem modem router is installed, operating with a SIM card from a Ukrainian mobile operator. The GER has also identified 2 Russian and 2 Chinese companies that supply components for drones of this type. Meanwhile, in the event of an escalation in the Baltic Sea, Russia has no chance. It is critically important for Russia to maintain at least partial control over the Baltic Sea, not because of the fleet, but because of the money. This is where the key route for oil product trade runs, providing the Kremlin with about $1 billion a day, half of which goes directly to the war against Ukraine. This is what experts are saying. According to them, trade volumes through the Baltic are 4 times higher than in the Black Sea. That means this is a strategic artery for the Russian economy. And it is precisely to protect this that Russia uses its Baltic fleet. However, its actual capabilities are many times lower than NATO's potential. Experts emphasize, despite attempts to strengthen it since the 1990s, the Russian fleet in the Baltic is at least 12 times weaker than NATO. As of today, Russia has 1 Project 956 destroyer, 4 corvettes armed with X-35 missiles, 5 Buyan-M ships with Calibre missiles, 5 anti-submarine ships, 4 Karakurt missile ships, and 1 submarine. This list seems impressive until you compare it with NATO's forces, which dominate the region both in numbers and technologically. Meanwhile, all the media are spreading information about Russian troops advancing into the Dnipropetrovsk region. Russian claims about an alleged offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk region are fake, according to the Center for Countering Disinformation. The center has officially refuted the information disseminated by the Kremlin, calling it yet another information attack. According to Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation, as of the morning of June 9, there has been no recorded advance of Russian troops in this direction. The statement made by Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov is also not true. Their goal is to destabilize the situation in Ukraine and sow panic. At the same time, the situation in the southeast of Donetsk region remains extremely tense. The 31st Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is holding the line under constant assaults. In the southern direction, the Russian army continues to intensively use artillery and aviation, striking at the positions of the defense forces and shelling frontline settlements. Offensive actions are ongoing, but there have been no breakthroughs toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. Against this backdrop, the Kremlin is trying to create an illusion of success through information manipulation, but the Center for Countering Disinformation has clearly stated no advance into the interior of the Dnipropetrovsk region has been recorded. The situation at the front is under control. Such statements are part of a standard tactic, loud fakes against the backdrop of local assaults. But the reality is different. The defensive line is holding, the enemy is not advancing, and the main goal remains psychological pressure on society and the media. Meanwhile, Russia has launched its summer offensive. The Kremlin has moved to a large-scale offensive phase of the war. The main strikes are concentrated in 3 directions: Konstantinivka, Pokrovsk, and the Sumy region. After pressure from the United States amid sluggish ceasefire negotiations initiated by Donald Trump's administration, Russia has opted for a forceful scenario. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the goal of the offensive is to break Ukraine's morale and give Putin at least some kind of victory to present to his domestic audience. In recent weeks, Russia has carried out a record number of strikes on Ukrainian cities, actively using guided aerial bombs. In response, Ukraine is attacking deep behind enemy lines with drones, including strikes on strategic facilities and Russian air bases. The war is entering a phase of mutual exhausting strikes. However, this appears to be only the prologue to a broader campaign. At the same time, Konstantinivka is under threat of encirclement. One of the key directions is Konstantinivka. The city has become a target for constant airstrikes. Up to 25 guided bombs are dropped daily. The population is being evacuated en masse by 15:00, the start time of the curfew. Ukrainian forces are preparing to defend under conditions of partial encirclement, fully aware of the city's strategic importance as a logistical hub. The offensive continues, so far without breakthroughs, but with a clear signal. Russia is betting on decisive battles specifically this summer. That's all for today. Tune in tomorrow for more news.
Since the beginning of the day, there have already been 75 battles on the front line. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reports that most of the Russian assaults are taking place in the Pokrovsk direction.
They are unable to carry out active offensive operations, so they have chosen the tactic of striking all logistical routes. First and foremost, of course, are Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, and there have already been repeated orders from Putin to capture Konstantinivka as a bridgehead for launching all offensive operations towards the Dnipropetrovsk region. That's why in recent days the firefights have been extremely intense. They are constantly shelling Konstantinivka and especially the road that essentially supplies the Pokrovsk grouping. We have thoroughly practiced and studied this same tactic in Pokrovsk.
In the Lyman sector, Ukrainian forces successfully repelled Russian assaults near Kharkivka in the Luhansk region, as well as Redkotub and Torske in the Donetsk region. The enemy also attempted to advance in the area of Novy Mir and Stepova Novoselka in the Kharkiv region. In the Kupiansk direction, Ukrainian defenders destroyed a tank, motor vehicles, and Russian trucks along with their personnel. In the Pokrovsk sector, fighters from the 3rd Brigade destroyed 2 more tanks and a mortar belonging to the occupiers. The warriors of the Omega Wing unit took out 3 howitzers belonging to the invaders. And in the southern direction, fighters from the 31st Brigade repelled the Russian assault carried out on motorcycles.
The enemy once again used motor vehicles, this time 27 units, aiming to quickly reach our forward positions, deliver fire on them and move rapidly. The attempt was unsuccessful. The enemy was detected in time and destroyed. From a statement by the communications unit of the 31st Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Facebook,
the operation of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Kursk region continues, despite the Kremlin's claims to the contrary. The destruction of a Russian fighter jet specifically in the Kursk direction only confirms this. Military analysts note,
this indicates an expansion of the presence of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Kursk region. Moreover, as a result of the ground operation, the Russian side has now been forced to acknowledge the operational encirclement of units of the Russian armed forces in the area of the settlement of Tyotkino. Furthermore, the occupiers know that there are virtually no logistical capabilities, and the units are surrounded in a tight ring by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, who have effectively begun clearing this settlement. As for the air component, we have clearly and convincingly demonstrated that the capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine to effectively neutralize Russian aerial targets are quite high, even on the territory of the Russian Federation itself.
The total losses of the aggressor country's army since the beginning of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 996,000 personnel. In the past 24 hours, 1,120 Russian soldiers were eliminated, along with 7 tanks, 11 armored vehicles, 42 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian equipment.
The Ukrainian armed forces created hell for the occupiers. An instant massacre of equipment, A grand operation went exactly by the book. Everything burned in minutes. The Kremlin is in panic there. Hasn't been such a blow to their armor since the start of the war. What does this mean for the front line? Who has the upper hand now? A route that could become a turning point. Don't miss the details right now.
Web 2 against Russian military equipment and railway logistics, that's what the new Ukrainian armed forces operation has been dubbed in Z channels.
Obvious and unthinkable. There's no point in staying silent anymore. The enemy destroyed a locomotive with tanks and dozens of armored vehicles. The enemy destroyed most of the equipment without any resistance. Operation Web 2. Someone has to answer for this.
And now, if they want to, a small group of saboteurs can disable entire aviation units. All it takes is to get close and launch a certain number of drones. Air defense, let's put it this way, cannot cope with an organized swarm of drones.
The defense forces of southern Ukraine destroyed a huge column of Russian military equipment by attacking a train transporting tanks and armored personnel carriers to the front.
The defense forces of southern Ukraine struck a locomotive with a column of enemy equipment. The enemy's losses amounted to 13 tanks and more than 100 units of armored and automotive equipment.
Officially, the armed forces of Ukraine have not yet disclosed how they managed to successfully strike the locomotive and over 100 units of enemy equipment. However, online specifically in the so-called Z-Swamp information is spreading that FPV drones were once again used by Ukraine in the special operation.
At some point, the hatches on the hopper-type grain rail containers started flying off. While the train was moving, these are the hatches used to load grain. It was through these openings that drones flew out and attacked the equipment positioned on the rail platforms. Whoever came up with the idea to combine a trainload of military equipment with grain cars is a mystery. How the SBU managed to hide drones in there is also unknown, but the result was this. The first strike hit the locomotive, after which the train began to lose speed and was brought to a stop. The enemy then destroyed most of the equipment without any resistance.
Supporting the theory about FPV drones is the fact that several weeks earlier, the President of Ukraine mentioned a successful special operation involving the mass destruction of occupation equipment using hundreds of small drones.
Recently, we carried out an interesting strike against them. At the same time, we hit them with 400 small drones. More than 40 pieces of equipment were destroyed simultaneously. We took this step. It was carried out solely by the military, only on the battlefield. It was an attempt at such an operation, and we will show them many times more than what this operation achieved.
It's also important to remember that Ukraine is actively expanding the range and production of its own missiles, bombs, and rocket-powered drones. Just recently, it was reported that Ukrainian ballistic missiles were used in combat for the first time.
In mid-May, tests were conducted that are being regarded as extremely successful. The missile traveled almost 300 kilometers and destroyed a Russian command post. The warhead of this missile weighs over 400 kilograms, making it a very powerful arsenal.
And precisely in the southern Kherson direction, the Ukrainian armed forces successfully tested a new experimental munition weighing more than 100 kilograms. No matter what was used to deliver this strike, one thing is clear. In response to the occupiers' plans to continue their offensive, destroy cities and seize new Ukrainian territories, Ukraine is ramping up its strikes on Russian rear positions and logistics. Military airfields, bridges, factories, ammunition depots and railway lines are being destroyed with unprecedented intensity and effectiveness.
The Ukrainian intelligence community is reducing the enemy's ability to redeploy personnel, deliver ammunition, evacuate the wounded, and accordingly is decreasing the intensity of the Russian troops' advance. Blocking logistics makes it possible to A, reduce the coefficient of fire damage, B, affect the redeployment of personnel, and accordingly the formation of assault groups.
Such special operations are becoming Ukraine's most important tool in reducing the military potential of the Russian invaders.
Russia is losing control. An epic strike. A factory that assembled components for Shaheds went up in smoke 1,000 kilometers from the front line, and 2 more Russian combat aircraft were destroyed right on the airfield. There is panic in Moscow. Shelters are being urgently built at 13 bases. They don't know where to save the remaining aircraft. But that's not all. The Russian Federation is pushing forward on 2 fronts at once. The Kremlin dreams of revenge, but the Ukrainian armed forces are already in their rear. What is happening on the front line right now? Watch this. Ukraine's defense forces struck the Savaslayka airfield in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region. This was reported by the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. As a result of the strike, 2 aircraft were hit. By the way, it is from this very airfield that Russia launches attacks on Ukraine, including with Kinzhal missiles.
At the moment, Ukraine is carrying out a comprehensive series of attacks on airfields hosting the Russian Federation's frontline army aviation, with the aim of reducing the activity of Russian aerospace forces aircraft during strikes on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine using KAB and FAB bombs. And I should note, prior to this, strikes were carried out on airfields used by the Russian aerospace forces. This includes the Milerovo airfield, where, by the way, there is currently a noticeable surge in the construction of engineering structures, specifically for the protection of Russian aerospace forces aircraft, and accordingly, strikes have also been carried out on the Savazleyka airfield, which is a base for MiG-31K aircraft, and the Sharoyko airfield.
The locations where strikes are being carried out on the territory of the Russian Federation and the territories it has temporarily occupied are quite diverse. In order to protect their aircraft, the Russians have begun actively building shelters at more than a dozen airfields. As a result, protective structures have appeared at 4 air bases in temporarily occupied Crimea, at the military airfields in Yeysk, Krymsk and Primorsko-Akhtarsk, at the Kanskaya air base in Adygia, and at the airfields in Akhtubinsk, Borisogledsk, Kursk and Lipetsk. Recently, earthworks have reportedly begun for the construction of 10 aircraft shelters at the airfield in Engels-Saratov region. It arrives not only by plane. In Cheboksary, Russia, the VNIR Progress Cheboksary plant was struck. Local authorities confirmed that the facility was hit and it was forced to halt operations immediately. According to the Astra Telegram channel, this plant produces a key component of Russia's defense against Ukrainian electronic warfare systems, the Kometa antennas. While military facilities are being hit in Russia, that same Russia is striking civilian populations in Ukraine. To protect its citizens, Ukraine was supposed to receive 20,000 special missiles to counter Shaheds, according to agreements with former US President Joe Biden. However, the current administration of Donald Trump decided to redirect them to the Middle East, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy reported. On June 6, French Minister of the Armed Forces Sébastien Lecornu did not specify the exact company, but announced that a major French automaker would be producing drones on Ukrainian territory. According to media reports, it is Renault Automatic Group. Montenegro wants to strengthen its position in NATO and help Ukraine. The country plans to set up drone production on its territory, with the intention of later providing them to Ukraine as military aid. Washington will help set up UAV production, allocating $15 million for this purpose. The Russians also have successes that look more like a mental disorder. For example, 3 years ago, they claimed to have supposedly captured the Donetsk region, and by the 4th year, they decided to say they were advancing on Dnipropetrovsk.
There is no objective evidence indicating that Russian occupation forces have reached the administrative borders of the Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. I would note that this is not the first time the Russian side has spread such informational provocations. Literally a month ago, the Russian side already claimed that assault units of the occupation army had supposedly reached the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region.
According to experts, the appearance of this information is yet another information and psychological operation by the Russian side since the start of the negotiation process in Istanbul. The Russians are doing this to twist Ukraine's arm during the process of reaching a peace agreement. The destruction of the elite, the RF brigade, has been wiped off the face of the earth. The losses are colossal. These soldiers were considered among the best in the occupiers' army, but they became cannon fodder for the Kremlin. They were sent on meat grinder assaults and then finished off by their own command. Why is Putin sacrificing the elite? What are the Russian generals hiding, and who is next in line for a purge? Shocking details in the report.
While the Kremlin dictator from his cozy office tells stories about how Russians are supposedly lining up voluntarily to go fight.
Our guys are going voluntarily. They come themselves 50, 60,000 a month. The guys come on their own.
At the front, Russian soldiers curse the day. Some were lured by money but ended up with nothing. Others were simply deceived and thrown in as cannon fodder.
I realized that I just got screwed over, and now I've ended up in all this shit. Excuse my language. And here I am now with a broken nose.
And there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of stories like this. For example, the Samara Guards Brigade has lost more than 12,000 soldiers since the beginning of the invasion. Over the years of the war, the only peacekeeping brigade of the Russian armed forces has changed its personnel at least 3 times, according to the publication Verska.
Units of the 15th Peacekeeping Brigade took an active part in combat operations in the Kyiv region. Later, these units were used as assault troops in several directions. Primarily, this was the Svatove-Kreminna direction in Luhansk region, and accordingly the Donetsk region Pokrovsk direction. It should be noted that the tactics used by the fighters of this unit are so-called banzai attacks.
Accordingly, it is in these local assaults that the highest number of Russians are killed. The lists of the dead include servicemen from at least 77 Russian regions. Most frequently mentioned are Tatarstan, Bashkortostan and Udmurtia.
This brigade suffered its heaviest losses in the Pokrovsk direction. By the way, it should be noted that when the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, said that in January 2025 alone, in the Pokrovsk direction, the Russian army suffered losses comparable to the entire period of the Second Chechen campaign. And let me remind you, according to the official data from the Ministry of Defense of the occupying country, about 7,500 personnel were killed at that time. So we can say that the core of the personnel losses of the occupying country's army consisted precisely of the fighters from this brigade.
In this video, there is a man with a bandaged arm wearing torn Russian military uniform. Opposite him, 4 people are lying on the ground. He is filming them and telling how the soldiers spent several days making their way to a safe location through swamps and fields. But it all turns out to be in vain.
Instead of providing our soldiers with the help we requested, they sent us a battery with a note. Let's read the note. Where is it? Take it out. Unfold it. If you don't make contact by 17:30, we'll blow you to hell with our own drones.
There are dozens of similar appeals from members of the brigade, but as for the fate of most of them, we can only guess. It turns out that personnel are dying at the hands of their own commanders.
It was the soldiers of this brigade who encountered a particularly devious tactic from their commanders, namely the mining of retreat routes for assault units. In other words, when soldiers were sent in frontal assaults against the positions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces without support from armored vehicles or firepower, it was essentially a one-way ticket.
And on top of that, the high command may demand money from the servicemen. If you don't share with them, then there's only one road for you.
You end up being zeroed out, either for refusing to follow orders or for not wanting to share your financial support with the higher command. That is, up to 30% of the combat pay a soldier receives must be handed over to the superior officer. If you refuse, the consequence is execution.
There it is, the true face of the Russian military machine. Let us remind you that in the first 5 months of 2025, the Russian army lost more than 190,000 of its soldiers in the war against Ukraine. The total number of eliminated occupiers since the start of the full-scale invasion is already approaching 1 million.
That's all for now. And for more fiery news from the front, tune in to our next broadcast.